Gritty winds clawed at Aaron's face as he crouched behind a fractured pillar, scanning the ruins through his tactical visor. The twin suns of Velar burned mercilessly above, their harsh light casting double shadows on the jagged stone remains that rose from the desert like broken bones. A sudden blip on his scanner caught his attention, movement about half a kilometer to the northeast. He adjusted his visor, enhancing the heat signature. Through the wavering haze, he made out a group of figures, heavily armed and clad in armor marked with crimson sigils, Scorith bounty hunters. What brings these scavengers out here? Aaron muttered, shifting for a better view. Then he saw what, or rather who, they were chasing. She moved like liquid silver, her purple skin gleaming under the twin suns, every movement fluid despite visible fatigue. Energy bolts streaked past her, missing by mere inches as she vaulted over a shattered column. Her silver hair whipped behind her, catching the light like strands of moonlight. Even from this distance, Aaron noticed the faded cybernetic implants etched into her body, Imperial tech. A decommissioned living weapon. One of the Scorith fired a neural net. She twisted to avoid it, her reflexes still sharp despite exhaustion, but her timing faltered. The net snagged her left leg, electricity surging through her. She fell hard, sand scattering around her. Got the defect. One of the hunters barked in the harsh tones of Imperial standard. Lord Zevrak will pay handsomely for this one's components. Aaron's jaw tightened as he watched them advance. He'd seen enough of the Empire's cruelty to know what decommissioning meant. They'd tear her apart, alive, for her tech. He glanced at his weaponry, a plasma rifle, 2 shock grenades and a vibroblade. The logical choice was to stay hidden. This wasn't his fight. Yet, something about the determination in her struggle, even as the net sapped her strength, struck a nerve. Damn it, Aaron muttered, already moving. When did I ever start making smart decisions? He activated his stealth module and slipped into the ruins, circling behind the hunters. There were 5 of them, all armed to the teeth. Their leader approached the fallen woman, a device in hand that Aaron knew would tear out her cybernetic core. Pulling a shock grenade from his belt, Aaron calculated his throw. The ancient ruins provided plenty of cover and would amplify the concussive force. With practiced precision he lobbed the grenade. The blast sent the hunters staggering. Before the echoes faded, Aaron opened fire, his plasma rifle cutting down their leader. 2 hunters turned toward him, but Aaron was already moving, dodging their wild shots as he dove behind a pillar. He waited for their weapons to overheat, then sprang out, firing 3 rapid bursts. One fell with a scream, the other tried to evade but wasn't quick enough. Aaron closed the distance, his vibroblade humming to life as he drove it into a gap in the hunter's armor. The remaining 2 hesitated. Fall back and regroup, one shouted. Amateurs, Aaron muttered, triggering a series of sonic charges he'd planted earlier. The focused sound waves incapacitated them, leaving them clutching their heads in agony. Aaron dispatched them efficiently, conserving his energy in the oppressive heat. When the last hunter fell, Aaron turned his attention to the woman. She had nearly freed herself from the neural net, though her movements were unsteady. Her silver eyes locked onto his, wary but calculating. Up close, her features were striking, high cheekbones, full lips, and skin like twilight, intricately marked with cybernetic patterns. Here to claim the bounty, human? Her voice was melodic, though laced with suspicion. Aaron deactivated his vibroblade and raised his hands in a gesture of peace. If I wanted you dead, I'd have let them finish the job. He approached slowly, his movements deliberate. Name's Aaron Cade. Mind if I help with that net? She studied him, her expression guarded. Zerina, she said finally. And if you try anything, you'll find I'm not as deactivated as they think. Noted. Aaron crouched beside her, examining the net's anchor points. Wouldn't expect anything less. But I am curious, what's an Imperial living weapon doing out here in the middle of nowhere? Her silence was heavy as he worked. Finally she spoke, her tone bitter. I became obsolete. The Empire doesn't waste resources on outdated tools. Aaron paused, his fingers stilling. They tossed you aside, he said quietly, anger simmering beneath his words. Like broken tech. That's what I am, Zerina replied, her voice flat. But something flickered in her silver eyes, a spark of defiance. Aaron disabled the net and stepped back. Funny thing about humans, he said, offering her a hand. We see people where the Empire sees equipment. She ignored his hand and rose gracefully, despite her exhaustion. Your reputation precedes you, Aaron Cade. The human who outmaneuvers Imperial forces instead of outgunning them. Though the stories failed to mention your penchant for saving strays. Aaron smirked, glancing at the fallen hunters. We should move. Their reinforcements won't be far behind. We. Zerina arched an elegant eyebrow. I don't recall agreeing to travel with you. Fine by me, Aaron said with a shrug. But there's an Imperial strike team about 3 clicks south and another bounty squad closing in from the east. Your call? He gestured toward the ruins. I'm heading for the old mining tunnels. They'll mask our heat signatures. Zerina hesitated, her gaze darting toward the distant sound of engines. The tunnels, she said reluctantly. But don't mistake this for trust, human. Aaron grinned. Wouldn't dream of it. He led the way, keeping to the shadows. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden behind a holographic camouflage screen. Aaron pulled it aside, revealing a narrow passage. Ladies first, he offered. Zerina's silver eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. So I can't see you try to stab me in the back? I think not. Aaron chuckled, stepping into the darkness. Trust issues. Can't imagine why. They moved cautiously through the winding tunnels, the silence broken only by the faint rumble of vehicles above. Despite the uneven terrain, Zerina moved with eerie precision, her steps nearly silent. The passage opened into a circular maintenance hub, scattered with long-abandoned mining equipment. Aaron swept the room with his scanner, ensuring they were alone. Not bad for a defective Imperial weapon, he said, glancing at her. Her expression softened, though her tone remained sharp. Not bad for a reckless human. Aaron allowed himself a faint smile. Maybe this rescue would be worth the trouble after all. Chapter 2, Strangers in the Shadows. The maintenance hub smelled of dust and rust, the stale air thick from decades of neglect. Zerina walked slowly, her silver eyes scanning every corner of the chamber. The faint hum of dormant machinery echoed faintly, adding an eerie undertone to the silence. Aaron leaned against a half-collapsed console, watching her. You always this jumpy, or is it just the company? She shot him a sharp look. Caution is survival, human. You wouldn't last long with your flippant attitude. Aaron grinned, unbothered. Flippant keeps me alive. That and knowing when to duck. Zerina didn't reply. Instead, she crouched by an exposed conduit, her fingers tracing the old wiring. Her cybernetic patterns glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her concentration. What are you doing? Aaron asked, stepping closer. Making sure this place doesn't blow up the moment you lean on the wrong panel, she said dryly. These mining hubs were notoriously unstable even before the Empire bombed them. Aaron crouched beside her, keeping his distance as she worked. He noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she moved. Residual exhaustion or maybe the degradation of her implants. Either way, it was clear she was running on sheer determination. Look, I'm not here to drag answers out of you, he said, his voice softer now. But if we're going to stay alive, I need to know what we're up against. Why are they after you? What makes you so important? Zerina paused, her fingers halting mid-motion. For a moment, Aaron thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she spoke, her tone clipped. I was part of Project Azrath. The Empire's attempt to create sentient weapons, hybrids of organic life and cybernetics. We were designed to be loyal, efficient, and disposable. Aaron frowned. He'd heard whispers of such experiments but had dismissed them as rumors. They didn't expect us to think for ourselves, Zerina continued, her voice laced with bitterness. When my implants began to degrade, I questioned my orders. They called it malfunctioning. I call it waking up. And now they want you back, Aaron said, piecing it together. Or, at least, the tech inside you. Zerina nodded. My neural core contains classified data, military codes, deployment strategies, schematics for their next generation of weapons. They'll tear it out of me even if it kills me. Aaron let out a low whistle. No wonder they sent a strike team. That's worth more than a few credits on the black market. Which is why I don't trust you, Zerina said, standing and crossing her arms. What's to stop you from turning me in yourself? Aaron stood as well, meeting her gaze. If I wanted to sell you out, I wouldn't have just risked my neck saving you from those hunters. Maybe you're playing the long game, she countered. Maybe, Aaron said with a shrug. Or maybe I just don't like the Empire and their habit of treating people like tools. Zerina studied him, her silver eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. Finally she sighed. You're an enigma, Aaron Cade. I'm not sure if that makes you dangerous or foolish. Can't it be both? He said with a grin. Before she could reply, a faint sound caught her attention. She raised a hand, signaling him to be silent. Aaron froze, his own instincts kicking in. There it was again, a soft metallic clink like footsteps on loose debris. We're not alone, Zerina whispered, her voice barely audible. Aaron pulled out his plasma rifle, his senses sharpening. Movement, he murmured, gesturing toward one of the tunnels leading out of the hub. Zerina's cybernetic patterns flared briefly as she activated her remaining systems. She stepped closer to Aaron, her stance tense. Seconds later, shadows flickered at the edge of their vision. A low, guttural voice echoed through the tunnel, speaking in a language Aaron didn't recognize. Scoreth? Zerina guessed. Aaron shook his head. Too guttural. Could be scavengers or worse. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and skeletal, with a chitinous exoskeleton that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Its 4 glowing eyes fixed on them, and it let out a low clicking sound. Behind it, more figures appeared, each armed with jagged weapons that looked like they were scavenged from a battlefield. Great, Aaron muttered. Tunnel crawlers. Veller's finest bottom feeders. They don't look friendly, Zerina said, her voice dry. They're not, Aaron replied, raising his rifle. But they're usually not stupid either. If we hold our ground, they might back off. One of the creatures stepped forward, brandishing a rusted blade. It clicked again, louder this time, a challenge. Or they might decide we're dinner, Aaron added, his grip tightening on his weapon. Zerina moved beside him, her posture shifting into a combat stance. Any brilliant plans, genius? Just one, Aaron said, his smirk returning. Don't die. The creatures lunged. Aaron fired the first shot, the plasma bolt slamming into the lead crawler and sending it sprawling. Zerina moved like a dancer, her movements impossibly fluid as she dodged and struck with precise blows. The tunnel erupted into chaos, the flickering glow of plasma bolts and cybernetic pulses lighting up the dark chamber. Aaron fought with practiced efficiency, using the scattered equipment for cover as he fired shot after shot. Zerina was a blur of motion, her fists and feet striking with inhuman speed and accuracy. Despite her earlier exhaustion, she fought as though she had something to prove. Could use some of that Imperial tech myself, Aaron muttered as he ducked a wild swing from one of the creatures. Too bad you're just a human, Zerina shot back, driving her elbow into a crawler's throat. The creatures began to falter, their numbers thinning as Aaron and Zerina pressed their advantage. Finally, the last crawler let out a shrill screech and bolted into the shadows, the others following suit. Aaron lowered his rifle, breathing heavily. Not bad, he said, glancing at Zerina. She didn't respond, her focus on something in the distance. More are coming, she said, her voice grim. Aaron followed her gaze. In the faint light, he saw dozens of glowing eyes moving toward them from the far tunnels. Time to run? He asked. Time to run, Zerina agreed. Without another word, they sprinted toward one of the side passages, their footsteps echoing through the dark. Chapter 3, Into the Depths. The narrow tunnel stretched before them like the gaping maw of a beast, dark and foreboding. Zerina sprinted ahead with uncanny grace, her silver eyes faintly glowing in the pitch-black passage. Behind them, the guttural screeches of the tunnel crawlers echoed closer, a terrifying reminder of how little time they had. Aaron kept pace as best as he could, his breath ragged. Next time, pick a tunnel, without murder bugs maybe? Next time, try not to attract attention, Zerina shot back without slowing. Hey, you're the one who glows in the dark. Aaron countered, gripping his plasma rifle as he dodged loose rocks and rusted pipes. Zerina didn't respond. Instead, she slowed for a fraction of a second, scanning the walls. Her cybernetic patterns flared brighter for an instant as she found what she was looking for, a recessed panel nearly obscured by debris. Here, she barked, wrenching the panel open. Aaron skidded to a halt beside her, glancing back at the approaching swarm. The faint glow of their pursuers' many eyes grew brighter by the second. Tell me you've got a plan, he said. Zerina didn't answer. Her hands moved with lightning speed, rerouting ancient wiring inside the panel. Sparks showered her face, and a faint hum filled the tunnel as the wall beside them shuddered. A hidden doorway slid open, revealing a maintenance shaft that plunged downward into the unknown. Down, she ordered, pushing Aaron toward the opening. He didn't argue. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, he grabbed the edges of the narrow shaft and slid down the steep incline, the metal rungs of the ladder scraping against his gloves. Zerina followed a moment later, the doorway slamming shut just as the first crawler reached it. The shaft was steep and unrelenting, the darkness growing thicker as they descended. Aaron's boots finally struck solid ground with a dull thud, and he staggered forward, his legs protesting the sudden stop. Zerina landed beside him with far more grace, her silver eyes scanning the new chamber. It was cavernous and lined with pipes that stretched into the shadows like skeletal fingers. Pools of stagnant water glistened in the faint light from her glowing patterns. "Where the hell are we now?" Aaron asked, his voice echoing slightly. Zerina crouched by one of the pipes, her hand brushing the corroded metal. "Secondary filtration system," she said. "The Empire used these tunnels to pump water from the deep aquifers. They abandoned them decades ago when the operation became too costly." Aaron exhaled sharply. "So, in other words, another death trap." Zerina shot him a look. "Would you prefer the crawlers?" Aaron smirked, but it faded as the faint sound of skittering reached his ears. "They're not giving up," he muttered, raising his rifle. "They won't stop until we're dead," Zerina said, her tone grim. She stood and pointed toward a rusted service hatch on the far wall. "That leads to the main pump station. If we can get there, we might be able to flood the lower tunnels and cut off their pursuit." "Might doesn't inspire confidence," Aaron replied, but he followed her lead. The two of them moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The hatch creaked loudly as Zerina forced it open, revealing another narrow passage. "You'd think the Empire could have built wider hallways," Aaron grumbled as he ducked inside. "Efficiency over comfort," Zerina said curtly, closing the hatch behind them. She twisted a locking mechanism into place, though the rusted metal didn't inspire much hope. The new tunnel was slightly less claustrophobic, with faint emergency lights flickering along the walls. The air was damp and smelled faintly of oil and decay. As they moved, Aaron noticed Zerina's pace slowing. Her movements, so precise and fluid before, now seemed stiff and uneven. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied, though her clenched jaw told a different story. Aaron grabbed her arm, stopping her. "You're not fine. Don't forget, I'm the one who pulled you out of that net. Your systems were already failing before we even got here." Zerina yanked her arm free, glaring at him. "I don't have time for weakness, Aaron." "Neither do you. Keep moving." Aaron held her gaze for a moment before sighing. "Stubborn as hell. Fine. But if you collapse, don't expect me to carry you." "I wouldn't dream of it," Zerina said, though there was a faint flicker of something, gratitude, in her silver eyes. The tunnel widened as they reached the pump station. It was an enormous chamber filled with towering machinery and a central reservoir of dark, murky water. The air thrummed faintly with the hum of dormant power. Zerina immediately moved to a control console, her fingers flying across the cracked keyboard. Aaron stayed near the entrance, keeping an eye out for their pursuers. "How long is this going to take?" he asked. "Depends on how much damage the system has sustained," she replied without looking up. "The pumps need to be reactivated manually, and the flow regulators are likely corroded." Aaron groaned. "So, longer than we'd like." A distant screech echoed through the tunnels, closer than before. "They're coming," Aaron warned, gripping his rifle. "I know," Zerina snapped. Her cybernetic patterns flared brighter as she interfaced directly with the console, bypassing the damaged controls. Sparks flew, and the machinery groaned as it began to awaken. Aaron positioned himself at the doorway, his pulse quickening as the sound of skittering claws grew louder. "You better hurry," he shouted over the rising noise. Zerina didn't reply, her entire focus on the console. The pumps roared to life, and the reservoir began to churn as water flowed through the pipes. "Almost there," she yelled. The first crawler appeared in the tunnel, its glowing eyes locking onto Aaron. He fired, the plasma bolt hitting it square in the chest. More followed, their screeches filling the air. "Zerina," Aaron called, his voice strained as he fired shot after shot. "Done," she shouted. She slammed her hand onto a final switch, and the pipes above them burst with water, flooding the tunnel behind them. The wave surged forward, sweeping the crawlers off their feet and dragging them back into the depths. Aaron backed away as the water rushed toward the entrance, but Zerina grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a ladder on the side wall. "Climb," she ordered. They scrambled up the ladder just as the water filled the chamber, the roar of the flood drowning out all other sounds. They reached a narrow ledge high above the rising waterline. Aaron leaned against the wall, panting heavily. "Well, that was fun," he said sarcastically. Zerina sat beside him, her breathing unsteady. "If that's your idea of fun, I'm not sure I want to know what you consider dangerous." Aaron chuckled, though it quickly faded. He glanced at her, noticing how pale her purple skin had become, and the way her glowing patterns flickered weakly. "Zerina," he began, but she cut him off. "We made it," she said firmly. "That's what matters." For now, Aaron thought grimly. But he knew their fight was far from over. Chapter 4: Shadows and Secrets. Aaron and Zerina sat on the narrow ledge, the roar of the flooded tunnels slowly fading into a muffled hum below. The air was thick with dampness, and their breathing echoed softly against the cold, slick walls. Zerina's faintly glowing silver eyes scanned their surroundings, her expression as unreadable as ever. "We can't stay here," she said after a moment. Aaron let out a humorless laugh. "No kidding. You think the crawlers can swim?" "They'll adapt," Zerina said grimly. "They always do." Aaron looked at her, noticing the faint tremor in her hands and the way her shoulders sagged. "You don't look like you're ready to go anywhere." "I don't have a choice," she shot back, forcing herself to her feet. Her movements were deliberate but shaky, and the glowing patterns on her purple skin flickered like a dying flame. Aaron rose beside her, gripping her arm to steady her. "You're running on fumes, Zerina. You can't keep this up forever." "I don't need forever," she said, her voice cold and clipped. "Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" Aaron pressed. "You keep dodging the question. Why is the Empire after you? What's so important that they'd send teams of hunters into these tunnels to drag you back?" Zerina didn't answer immediately. She pulled away from his grasp, steadying herself against the wall. "It's not your concern?" "Like hell it's not." Aaron snapped. "I've risked my life for you twice now. If I'm going to keep sticking my neck out, I think I deserve to know why." Zerina's silver eyes met his, her expression hard. For a moment, Aaron thought she was going to tell him to mind his own business. But then, with a weary sigh, she relented. "The Empire didn't just discard me because I was obsolete," she said quietly. "I'm incomplete. Broken." Aaron frowned. "Incomplete how?" She hesitated, then rolled up the sleeve of her tattered jumpsuit, revealing a series of jagged scars running along her forearm. Embedded in her skin were several dark, inactive implants, their edges corroded and sparking faintly. "They designed me to be a weapon," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "Stronger, faster, more precise than any human or alien soldier. But their experiments, they didn't go as planned. My systems began to degrade and I started to malfunction." Aaron stared at the implants, a knot forming in his stomach. "So they just threw you out?" Zerina's jaw tightened. "To them I was a failed prototype. A waste of resources. They sent me to a decommissioning facility to be dismantled and recycled for parts." Aaron felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "That's monstrous." "It's the Empire," she said simply. "Monstrous is their standard operating procedure. But if they wrote you off as a failure, why are they after you now?" Zerina hesitated again, her gaze shifting away from him. "Because they were wrong. I'm not just a failed experiment. There's something buried in my systems, something they overlooked. I don't know what it is, but they've realized it's valuable. And now they want it back." Aaron rubbed the back of his neck, letting the weight of her words sink in. "So what's the plan? Just keep running until they give up?" "They won't give up," Zerina said. "Not until they've torn me apart to find whatever it is they're looking for. Then we make sure they don't get the chance," Aaron said firmly. Zerina arched an eyebrow at him. "You're awfully eager to get involved in a fight that doesn't concern you?" Aaron shrugged. "I've never been a fan of the Empire. And besides," he offered her a small, lopsided grin. "You're starting to grow on me?" Zerina rolled her eyes but didn't argue. "If you're serious about helping me, we'll need to keep moving. There's an access point to the surface about 3 kilometers from here. We can use it to get out of the tunnels." "And then what?" "We regroup. Find somewhere safe to lay low while I figure out how to stabilize my systems." Aaron nodded. "All right. Lead the way, boss." Zerina started down the narrow ledge, her movements still careful and deliberate. Aaron followed close behind, his rifle at the ready. As they moved through the tunnels, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe around them, and every faint sound sent his heart racing. "Are you sure we're alone down here?" he asked. Zerina glanced back at him, her silver eyes narrowing. "No. Stay alert." They continued in tense silence, the faint hum of machinery and the distant trickle of water the only sounds in the oppressive darkness. After what felt like hours, they reached a junction where several tunnels converged. Zerina paused, her gaze flicking between the passages. "This way," she said, pointing to the leftmost tunnel. Aaron followed her, but as they entered the new passage, he heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper barely audible. "Did you hear that?" he asked, stopping in his tracks. Zerina froze, her head snapping toward the darkness behind them. Her glowing patterns flared brighter, casting faint light on the walls. Then out of the shadows a voice emerged. "You're not as alone as you think." Aaron spun around, his rifle raised as a figure stepped into the dim light. It was a man, Or at least it used to be. His body was heavily augmented with cybernetics, more machine than flesh. His eyes glowed a dull red and his voice was cold and mechanical. "Who the hell are you?" Aaron demanded. The stranger smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who's been looking for her," he said, nodding toward Zerina. Zerina's expression hardened. "If the Empire sent you, you're wasting your time." "I'm not going back." The stranger chuckled, a low, hollow sound. "Oh, I'm not with the Empire. I'm an interested party. And you, Zerina, are more valuable than you realize." Aaron stepped in front of Zerina, his finger hovering over the trigger. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The stranger tilted his head, his glowing red eyes locking onto Aaron. "Brave. But foolish." Before Aaron could react, the stranger raised his hand, and a surge of energy erupted from his palm, slamming into Aaron and sending him crashing into the wall. "Aaron?" Zerina shouted, rushing to his side. The stranger took a step closer, his cold smile widening. "You can't run from this, Zerina. Sooner or later, you'll have to face what you are." Zerina stood, placing herself between the stranger and Aaron, her cybernetic patterns blazing with renewed intensity. "Then let's get this over with," she said, her voice steady and resolute. The chamber fell silent as the two faced off, the tension crackling like static electricity in the air. Aaron groaned, struggling to his feet. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice weak but determined. Zerina didn't look back. "Stay out of it, Aaron. This is my fight." But Aaron had no intention of staying on the sidelines. Gripping his rifle, he prepared to stand beside her, ready for whatever came next. The battle was just beginning. Chapter 5, Echoes of Power. The chamber erupted into chaos as Zerina launched herself toward the cybernetic stranger, her movements a blur of speed and precision. Her glowing patterns pulsed brighter with each step, illuminating the dark space like a living weapon reborn. The stranger didn't flinch. He raised his arm, and a wave of concussive energy blasted toward Zerina. She twisted midair, avoiding the brunt of the attack, but the force still sent her skidding backward. Aaron braced himself as the shockwave rippled through the room, sending ancient debris crashing to the floor. His heart pounded as he raised his rifle, firing a series of plasma bolts at the stranger. The shots hit their mark, but the man barely staggered. His cybernetic armor absorbed the impact, glowing faintly as it dissipated the energy. "You'll have to do better than that," the stranger said, his voice calm and unervingly composed. Aaron gritted his teeth, diving behind a broken mining drill for cover. "Got any weaknesses, Zerina? Now's the time to share." "Working on it," Zerina shouted, charging again. This time her approach was more calculated. She feinted to the left before darting to the right, her fist slamming into the stranger's side. Sparks flew as her blow connected, and for the first time, the man let out a low grunt of pain. "You're stronger than I expected," he admitted, his red eyes narrowing. "But you're still incomplete." Zerina didn't respond. She followed up with a flurry of strikes, each one aimed at the seams in his cybernetic armor. The stranger blocked most of them, but her relentless assault forced him to take a step back. Aaron peeked out from his cover, analyzing the fight. Zerina was holding her own, but it was clear the stranger was toying with her, testing her limits. If they didn't find a way to turn the tide soon, she'd burn out. His gaze fell on the discarded mining equipment scattered across the chamber. An idea began to form. "Zerina, keep him distracted," he shouted. "Not like I have a choice," she snapped, narrowly dodging another energy blast. Aaron sprinted to a nearby console, brushing dust off the control panel. The screen flickered to life, displaying a schematic of the chamber and its surrounding tunnels. His eyes darted across the controls until he found what he was looking for, a set of power conduits running beneath the floor. He grinned. "Bingo." Tapping furiously at the console, he rerouted power to the conduits, overloading the ancient circuits. The ground beneath their feet began to hum, faint vibrations growing stronger by the second. The stranger tilted his head, his attention briefly shifting to Aaron. "What are you doing?" "Something you're not gonna like," Aaron replied, slamming his fist onto the activation key. The floor erupted with a deafening crack as a surge of electricity burst from the conduits. The stranger cried out, his body convulsing as the energy coursed through his cybernetic systems. Sparks flew from his implants and the red glow in his eyes flickered. "Now, Zerina," Aaron yelled. Seizing the opportunity, Zerina closed the distance between them in an instant. Her glowing patterns flared with blinding intensity as she delivered a powerful kick to the stranger's chest. The force of the impact sent him crashing into the wall, where he slumped, motionless. For a moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the crackle of electricity and the distant rumble of the tunnels above. Aaron stepped out from behind the console, his rifle still trained on the stranger. Is he dead? Zerina approached the fallen figure cautiously, her glowing eyes scanning his unmoving form. No, she said after a moment. But he's disabled. For now. Good enough for me, Aaron said, lowering his weapon. As the adrenaline began to fade, Zerina staggered, her glowing patterns dimming. Aaron rushed to her side, catching her before she could fall. Easy, he said, guiding her to sit on a nearby crate. You've been running on empty for too long. You need to rest. I'm fine, she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Aaron gave her a pointed look. Yeah, you're fine. And I'm the Emperor of Aridia. Zerina let out a tired laugh, shaking her head. You're insufferable. And you're stubborn, Aaron shot back, pulling a water canister from his pack and handing it to her. She accepted it reluctantly, taking a small sip before looking back at the stranger's motionless body. He's not just some mercenary, she said quietly. The way he fought, he knows what I am. What I'm capable of. Aaron frowned. You think he's part of the same program that created you? Maybe, she said, her expression dark. Or maybe he's something worse. Aaron followed her gaze, unease settling in his chest. If he's worse, then we're in deeper trouble than I thought. Zerina didn't respond, but the tension in her jaw spoke volumes. Suddenly, the stranger's eyes flickered back to life, the red glow faint but steady. Aaron raised his rifle, but Zerina held up a hand to stop him. Wait, she said. The stranger's voice was weak but clear. You can't run forever, Zerina. The Empire will find you. And when they do, you'll wish you'd come with me. Zerina stepped closer, her glowing patterns flaring again. Who sent you? The stranger chuckled, a sound more mechanical than human. You already know the answer. Before Zerina could press further, his body convulsed, and a burst of static erupted from his chest. His cybernetics sparked violently, and within seconds his entire body shut down. Aaron lowered his rifle, his heart racing. What the hell just happened? Failsafe, Zerina said grimly. Whoever sent him didn't want us getting any answers. Aaron swore under his breath. Great. So now what? Zerina turned to him, her silver eyes burning with determination. We keep moving. If they know where we are, we don't have much time. Aaron nodded, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. All right, lead the way. But as they made their way toward the next tunnel, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Empire's reach was vast, and if Zerina was right, their enemies were far more dangerous than they'd imagined. For better or worse, there was no turning back now. Chapter 6. The Price of Freedom. The tunnel was darker and colder the deeper they ventured. The ancient mining shafts groaned as if the earth itself resented their presence, and the faint echoes of distant engines still chased them through the depths. Aaron's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom, while Zerina's faintly glowing patterns provided an eerie, otherworldly light of their own. Zerina moved with renewed purpose, though Aaron could see the exhaustion in her every step. He wanted to insist they rest, but her fierce determination, and the ever-present threat of pursuit, kept him silent. They finally emerged into a vast underground chamber. Massive machinery loomed in the shadows like forgotten giants, remnants of an industry that had long since ground to a halt. A deep pit yawned at the center of the space, its depths obscured by darkness. Aaron scanned the chamber, his tactical visor highlighting the structural weaknesses in the walls and the faint heat signatures of small, skittering lifeforms. This place looks like it could collapse if you sneeze too hard, he muttered. It'll hold, Zerina said, her voice steady. She walked to the edge of the pit, gazing into the abyss. Aaron approached cautiously, stopping a few steps behind her. What is this place? An extraction site, she said. The Empire used it to mine a rare mineral that powered their early cybernetics. It's useless to them now, but back then, she trailed off, her silver eyes narrowing. Aaron followed her gaze, frowning. What are you looking for? The source, she said simply. Source of what? She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The Empire didn't just mine this place for resources. They experimented here. On people like me? Aaron felt a chill crawl up his spine. Why here? Because this mineral has unique properties, Zerina explained. It enhances neural conductivity, makes cybernetics more responsive, more powerful. But prolonged exposure, she looked back at the pit. It changes people. Corrupts them. Most subjects didn't survive. Aaron's jaw tightened. But you did. Barely, she admitted. And now the Empire wants to reclaim what they left behind. They think they can use it to perfect their living weapons. Aaron glanced at the pit again, a sinking feeling in his gut. You're saying they're still experimenting? Zerina nodded. And if they catch me, they'll use what's left of me to continue their work. The weight of her words settled heavily between them. Aaron clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a soldier anymore. But he couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Then we destroy it, he said firmly. Zerina blinked, her glowing patterns flickering faintly. Destroy what? All of it, Aaron said, gesturing to the chamber around them. The pit, the machinery, the Empire's access to this place. We bury it so deep they can't ever dig it back up. Zerina hesitated, her expression conflicted. It's not that simple. The explosion could destabilize the entire region. We'd never make it out in time. Aaron grinned. Who said anything about us making it out? Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am, he said, his tone unyielding. If we don't stop them here, they'll keep hunting you. They'll keep experimenting on people. This ends now. Zerina looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes searching his face. Finally, she nodded, her resolve hardening. If we're doing this, we do it together. Aaron smirked. Wouldn't have it any other way. They worked quickly, scavenging the chamber for explosives and power cells. Aaron rigged the charges while Zerina used her advanced systems to calculate the precise locations needed to trigger a full collapse. As they placed the final charge, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Aaron cursed under his breath. They're here. Zerina activated her scanner. 2 teams heavily armed. They'll be on us in minutes? Aaron nodded grimly. Then we hold the line. They took up positions near the pit, using the broken machinery as cover. Aaron checked his rifle, while Zerina flexed her hands, the glowing patterns on her skin flaring brighter than ever. The first wave of enemies stormed into the chamber, their weapons blazing. Aaron and Zerina fought as one, their movements perfectly synchronized. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness, and the air was filled with the sharp crackle of energy shields and the hum of Zerina's strikes. For every enemy they took down, more seemed to pour in. Aaron's heart pounded as he fired shot after shot, his body screaming in protest. Beside him, Zerina moved like a force of nature, her glowing patterns casting eerie shadows across the chamber. But they were outnumbered, and the enemy was relentless. Aaron glanced at the timer on his detonator. 2 minutes. Zerina, we need to fall back. She shook her head, her eyes blazing. Not yet. A stray plasma bolt struck Aaron's shoulder, and he cried out, dropping his rifle. Zerina was at his side in an instant, pulling him behind cover. You're hurt, she said, her voice tight with worry. I'm fine, he lied, clutching his shoulder. Just stick to the plan. The timer ticked down. 1 minute. Zerina looked at him, then at the pit. Her expression softened, and for the first time she smiled, a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Aaron, she said quietly. He frowned. For what? For showing me that I'm more than what they made me, she said. For reminding me I'm still human. Before he could respond, she turned and sprinted toward the pit. Zerina, he shouted, struggling to stand. She didn't look back. With a final, determined glance, she leapt into the abyss, her glowing patterns flaring one last time as she activated the detonator in her hand. The explosion was blinding, a massive wave of heat and light that shook the entire chamber. Aaron was thrown to the ground, his vision swimming as the world collapsed around him. When he came to, he was lying on a rocky slope, the night sky stretched above him. The pit, the machinery, and the tunnels were gone, buried beneath tons of rubble. But Zerina was gone too. Aaron sat up slowly, his heart heavy. He stared at the ruins, his mind replaying her final moments. She had saved him. She had saved everyone. For a long time he sat in silence, the weight of her sacrifice settling over him. Finally he stood, gripping his rifle tightly. The Empire would come looking for answers. They would send more hunters, more machines. But Aaron wouldn't let Zerina's sacrifice be in vain. He would fight. For her. For everyone like her. Because some things were worth fighting for, even when the cost was everything.